Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mobilize Women Day 2. We are so excited that you're able to join us today to be a part of these conversations, to get inspired, to learn, to meet other people. And we have such a great event set up for you today. We are going to be talking about human-centric policies and cultures. And so I'm Madeline Kelly. I'm on the corporate partnerships team here at Ellevate, and I'll be your host for today. If you're not already familiar with Ellevate, we are a coalition of ambitious, supportive women and our allies who show up for each other and mobilize to change the culture of business. Mobilize Women Week is a movement that we created, and it's based on Ellevate's purpose of achieving equality for all. We're really focused on giving diverse voices, specifically women, a seat at the table where decisions are made. And typically we do host this event in person in New York, but for obvious reasons, we couldn't do that this year. However, we are so happy that we're able to come together virtually and mobilize. So again, if you're not already super familiar with Ellevate and our Mobilize Women Week, this is a week-long experience that we're hosting. Started yesterday and it's going all the way through until Friday. There's going to be opportunities to engage with our different speakers and also with the other participants. So make sure you use the chat function. Our past events that we've done have been super active, and so don't be shy. The other thing I want to mention too is that Mobilize Women Week is not just limited to this week. We mobilize 365 days a year. We do this through in-person events pre-COVID. We do this through our squads program and through virtual events that we host. So it's really about making those connections, getting inspired, getting supported, growing relationships so that we can all mobilize together. So we want to make sure that we're all using our time wisely. So make a point to really be active in today's session and make sure that you go afterwards to mobilizewomen2020.com because there's a ton of resources on there and ways that you can take action after this event. Another note is that there is a Q&A box on the bottom of your platform. So you can go ahead and ask questions in there. I will be fielding all those questions, and then we'll do a quick Q&A at the end. We also do have closed captioning available. So you can turn that on the bottom. You can turn on the CC for closed captioning. If you do have any questions or problems throughout the event, you can just send me a message. My name is Madeline Kelly, and it says Ellevate next to the chat. And then the last piece is that you're able to go to Ellevate Network and become a free member today. So go ahead and join. And with all of that, I know you didn't come to hear me speak. I am so proud to kick this over to Kristen Kimmel. She's the head of advisor recruiting and field marketing with RBC Wealth Management US. So here you go.
All right, thank you, Madeline. I'm hoping everybody can see me now and the logistics are all working out. I felt like that music was great, and had we been gathering all in person, we'd have been up dancing and celebrating being together, but this is the best alternative that we have available, and I'm thrilled to be here today to be part of such an incredible event that brings together so many amazing women. I'd like to take just a few minutes and share with you some personal stories and talk about the importance of human-centric policies in our organizations. So several years ago, one of my managers approached me excitedly to share with me that her son had tried out and made the junior varsity baseball team. And while we celebrated together for a minute, she very quickly became serious and said, well, the downside is junior varsity games are played in the afternoon. It's about an hour commute for me, and they're 3 days a week. So I've discussed it. I could see she was struggling with her balance. And she said she had discussed it with her family and with her son, and that she would be requesting to leave early 1 day a week in order to get to her son's baseball games. So how did I respond to that? I said, absolutely not. I think that's completely unacceptable, but not for the reasons that you might think. Having been a parent of children who had extracurricular activities that I was traveling to all over the United States, I urged her to reconsider and think about attending all of her son's baseball games, or as many as she could possibly get to, and that she should really reconsider that option. She looked at me a little bit puzzled, but we continued on the conversation, and I started to share my rationale behind it. So I started with the why. Why do I think that this is important? First and foremost, it's temporary. For those of you that know Minnesota, the baseball season, we have to wait until the end of April for the snow to melt. So it's a very short season, and it has to end by the end of the school year, which is often the first week of June. So we're talking 5, maybe 6 weeks at most that she would be trying to do this. I then asked her if her son was disappointed, or if he might remember that she wasn't able to attend all of his baseball games. And she said yes, but he also understood that it conflicted with her regular work hours, and that if he made the varsity team next year, that the games would be later and there'd be more options for her to attend more of his games. I then asked her if she thought her colleagues in the office would remember years from now whether she either rescheduled a meeting, attended via call while she was traveling to some baseball field in the middle of nowhere, or if she even missed a few meetings during this 6-week time period. To which she smiled and said, you know, I take back what I've said. I'm going to, over the next 5 weeks, attend as many of my son's baseball games in the afternoons, which could likely be I'm out of the office for a few hours, 3 days a week. So what was the result? What was the impact of that? First and foremost, for her personally, it turned out to be a great decision, because the next year when she thought her son would be trying out for the varsity baseball team, he actually announced that he would in fact not be trying out for baseball and would instead be doing spring training for the upcoming fall football season. So had she not made that decision, she would have missed out on the majority of her son's baseball high school career. From a professional standpoint, I'm happy to say that she's been promoted several times since and is currently an executive on our leadership team as a chief administrative officer. So by giving her some flexibility and recognizing her responsibilities outside of work, she was actually able to thrive both personally and professionally. That type of story shouldn't be the exception. It should be the norm. But how do we get to a point where we have organizations that are diverse, that are inclusive, that are supportive, that are focused on the well-being of employees? How do we create organizations that put people, humans, colleagues, however we want to define it, at the very center of every single decision that's being made by individual managers and the center of the policies that we're rolling out? Now, I know those decisions need to be balanced, and we have a fiscal responsibility within our organizations, but it's clear, and it is a fact, that business growth and employee well-being are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, they are more interconnected today than ever before. Study after study shows that companies with engaged, happy, healthy employees outperform in the short term and in the long run. So how do we create those cultures? How do we create companies that are focused on employee well-being and engaged employees? Is it about expensive perks, lavish offices, happy hours, long weekends? Well, all of that sounds like a lot of fun. It actually is companies that embrace creating a culture where people feel like they belong, where this really starts to happen. So what does it take to make that type of a culture? It comes in many forms. It can come in the form of flexible and remote workspaces. It comes in the form of family-friendly policies. It comes in the form of fair pay for all employees. And it also comes in the form of space. And when I say space, I'm talking about the space allowing us to bring our whole selves to work that we have going on in our entire lives. Companies who embrace and put people and the humans at the center of their cultures really can reap the benefits of a diverse and inclusive workspace. We know that millions of Americans are struggling with the same type of balance questions that manager spoke to me about. But if we look at this pandemic, actually, surprisingly, has forced in many ways companies who are not quite ready or who may be a little bit behind to be able to begin to embrace this. So let's talk about the remote workspace for just a minute, a little bit further. With millions of Americans struggling to find the ability to manage their personal and professional lives, prior to 2020, less than 4% of Americans were working from home or working remotely full-time. That number today is over 50%, according to Brookings. And if you look at the top 20% of earners, those that you often consider having desk jobs or many in the financial sector, that number is actually over 70%. And this is a big deal. This is a really big deal. Because prior to 2020, leaders, executives, boards, professors, journalists, everybody spent decades debating the risks and the benefits of a large-scale remote workforce. And many came to the conclusion that the risks far outweighed the benefits. And that very, very butts and seats mentality, that mentality that having to come into the office, regardless of what was going on in your personal life, was putting many employees in conflict. They had the demands of their personal life, and whether that might be an illness, childcare responsibilities, parent care responsibilities for those of us in the sandwich generations, or anything that might be going on, they were at a conflict. They felt that they had limited options available to them, and they simply had to put their heads down and come into work regardless of what it might be that's going on in their personal lives. But I'm happy to say in 2020, as companies were actually forced to embrace this type of work style, guess what happened? The results are astounding. The work is getting done, and companies and people are thriving in this environment. So I'd like to move on really quickly to the next topic of human-centric policies. What can we do in organizations to incorporate employees' personal lives and their well-being into our policies? Let's go back to remote workspace. If you look at it, one of the things that's been more apparent than ever is in the remote work, it's visible that life is going around people. So before we believed that while they were at the office, that their personal lives simply ceased to exist, maybe, I don't know, but when they're working from home, it's front and center. How many of you have been on a Zoom call where there's been a guest appearance from a dog, a pet, a partner or spouse, or even children? I know myself personally, one time I was presenting on a national call like this, looking over the top of my screen, pleading with my eyes to the FedEx person who was dropping off a package to please not ring the doorbell that would send my dog into a barking frenzy and disrupt the overall call. But now we're able to embrace that, and we've gotten to know our colleagues even better. And that is something that I think is really important as part of this. But in this time, we've also added an additional responsibility of parents with school-age children. So in addition to the already demands they had in their personal life and in their professional life, they've taken on the e-learning responsibilities for their children. And this spring was really challenging. And I'm happy to say that our organization, RBC, was able to quickly come to the table with some options to make available for people as they were facing these new challenges. One of the new policies that we rolled out very quickly last spring was to address the needs of parents in this e-learning environment. So first and foremost, we added additional PTO for colleagues who had children at home, and they were struggling to find the balance between the work and the e-learning responsibilities that they had. And for those employees that were deemed essential and needed to go into the office, but now were faced with childcare because they had a child home from school, we provided continuity of pay so that they would be able to work reduced hours and meet the demands that they had in this new environment. Certainly those types of policies cost the organization money. But in this instance, we believe that making the investments in the well-being of our employees would have a return far greater. Added to that, during the pandemic, as we saw this time of uncertainty go on beyond what everybody had anticipated, we added mental health benefits and made them available for free to all employees, regardless of whether they were enrolled in our insurance programs or not. And I know throughout this conference, we've talked about the importance of mental health at this particular time. But even before the pandemic, I'm proud to say I was part of an organization that looked at options that were available to individuals that were facing challenges. Nursing moms, for example, as they were dealing with challenges of travel and trying to figure out how they could continue to nurse, they were forced again with limited options, either to stop nursing before they were ready or to try to figure out how they could step out of a role that required travel. We partnered with Milk Stork, an organization that makes travel internationally and domestic available, but by providing the equipment and supplies, as well as temperature controlled storage and shipment to their homes for employees. No more having milk contaminated as you were trying to take it through the airport after lugging your equipment with you when you were traveling. And in addition to that, we've done extended maternity for sales individuals or individuals who are on a commission-based pay, trying to take into consideration all of the different things and including paid leave for caregivers, whether you're caring for a sick child, a spouse, or even a parent. So as I mentioned, the pandemic has really pushed companies whether they were ready to embrace it or not. But I think that we can take the lessons that were learned during this time and the progress that we've made and we can redefine the normal that we have when we re-enter our workspaces. So with that, I'll turn it back to Madeline and we'll start with the panel.
Hi there. Thank you so much for that, Kristen. That was such a nice story to start with, too. I think it really does come down to just being personal and being vulnerable and honest about these things. So with that, we are going to kick off to our moderator and our panelists. So we have Courtney Conley, career reporter at CNBC, Make It. Mabel Abraham, assistant professor of management at Columbia Business School. Kelly Toulier, executive vice president and general counsel and corporate secretary at Visa. And Ara Tucker, senior vice president, head of talent and culture at Audible.
Thank you so much, Madeline, for that amazing introduction. And thank you so much to everyone who is tuned in. I hope that you can see us all okay and hear us all okay, because we're in for an amazing conversation. And I want to jump right into it. I think we can all agree that this year has been nothing like anything that we could have predicted. And we're seeing now more than ever how important human-centric workplaces are to not only attracting the best talent, but also retaining the best talent. And so my first question, I want to open it up to all three of our panelists. What does human-centric mean to you? And for workplaces that have not always prioritized a human-centric workplace, what's one of the first things they can do to build that culture?
So I can kick it off, Courtney. Everyone can hear me. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here because I think in the last few months, as Kristen mentioned, it's been so surreal. I was in the park today and a woman complimented me on my sneakers. And it was the first time that I really smiled from behind my mask and thanked somebody who wasn't in my family. And for me, it was one of the first in-person moments that wasn't happening at a remove. It wasn't celebrating a birthday, a wedding, a bat mitzvah, a team, celebration through a screen. And I share that because it was the first time that I also realized that I've changed. I'm always thinking about how do you put people first, but I'm also realizing that, we've been forced to put people first in a different way. And I want to make sure that, we think about how are we changing our actions so that in real life and in virtual life, we're showing up for people. I really feel like this isn't an academic thing. It's really about how do we treat real life people with all of the multidimensionality that they bring, and they're searching for connection and ways to contribute. So if I could just pivot to the next part of your question, Courtney, you asked what can organizations do? And I think it takes upfront work. It's not just about being honest about ourselves as leaders or as employees as we evolve, but it's thinking about what does your company need? Being self-aware, being clear, what do you value? What's the mission that you're trying to accomplish? And what types of people do you need to get on board, to stay, and to really develop to drive your company forward? And who do you have that you could use, but who do you also not have? And being just as clear about who you need to get on board and what you can do to change that reality. So I just want to be clear. I know that, just like people, companies can't be everything to everyone, but they can put forward their articulated values, the reason for being, and ensure that all along the employee journey, from attraction to the next chapter, that all employees are expected to take active, participation in cultivating a workplace that's human-centric and that's in service of others, whether it's customers, shareholders, colleagues, or your community. And in addition to people, I don't want us to always focus on people, even though they're very important. It's also looking at the processes. What are the assumptions, the practices, and the policies that might actually be in odds with your vision? So I think if we can inspect both of those regularly, what's going on with our people and what's going on with our organizations, and being willing to iterate as times and people evolve, then I think we can get there.
Great. Kelly,
maybe I'll jump in because I'm going to build on some of what Ara said. So in terms of what it means to me, I think what this pandemic has done is really opened our eyes to the unique challenges that everybody faces. think very often we think about, I saw some of the commentary in the chat about who has a dog in the room or a child in the room. And I think when we're on these calls, when we're working from home one random day and most people feel like they're in the office, we think we're facing those challenges alone. Everyone else has live-in help for their children. It's only my kid who's going to run into the room and cause a disruption. And in reality, that FedEx man at the door making the dog bark happens to all of us. And as we're all working from home, we get to witness that firsthand. So it sort of equalizes the playing field. It helps us realize that it's not just a women's issue. When men are working from home, they're also having their kids run into the room and having their dog bark. And it really just makes us feel like we're more unified and our challenges aren't so unique or personal to us. That's been an eye-opening experience for me. And I'm a gender scholar who thinks about these issues often from the lens of it being a women's issue. And in reality, it's just a life issue. We all have homes and husbands or partners, wives. We all have children or dogs or cats, and it's just hard for all of us. In terms of what organizations can do, I just want to build on this point about policies. I think one question organizational leaders can ask themselves is essentially, what will implementing this rule or policy mean for my employees? And more specifically, if I say that you can't have the flexibility of working from home, does that affect all of the employees equally? Or is it likely to disadvantage racial minorities or women in ways that it doesn't disadvantage my white male employees? So really pushing back and asking that question about policies that are not so obviously gendered or racialized in some way, but asking that about every single policy, being sure that when you're implementing something, making a decision, that A, it's a necessary decision and that it isn't going to disadvantage some subset of the employee population to really help make it an equal playing field and help everybody.
And Kelly, if you can add to that a bit, kind of going to Mabel's point about policies in place, and with this pandemic specifically, we've seen the disproportionate impact it's had on people of color, on women, on parents. Can you speak about what companies can do to kind of mitigate this impact and retain talent? And also, what can allies do in the workplace to help out?
Absolutely, I'd love to speak to that. And I have to start though, Courtney, because Kristen told such a great story to begin, and it made me reflect a little bit about myself and my journey of becoming more human-centric as a leader. I've been in corporate America for over 25 years, and I thought back to when my son started kindergarten. I wish Kristen was my leader then, because I have to tell you the truth is, at the time I was working in Dubai, and had to roll across a lot of countries. And I wasn't there in his first day of kindergarten. I only have one child, and I couldn't make it because I felt like my obligation was to be in that airplane and to be in that meeting. And you know, where I sit today is, if anybody in my team ever made that decision, or in our organization overall at Visa, I would be mortified. I'd be heartbroken that they felt that sort of pressure, that they would miss something so important to them. And I've learned, you know, being a lawyer for all these years, it's a tough environment. It's very competitive, kind of fall into the traps. It's been my job for the last 25 years to show that's not the way. And that is not the culture. And at Visa, it is certainly not the culture. And in terms of how it comes into the company, it comes from the top down, absolutely, without a doubt. And our leader, Al Kelly, our CEO, everything is about the people. Without people who are happy, that love their jobs, that want to work with this company, we're not going anywhere, is how we view it. So we're constantly looking at policies and culture and the way that we work with our workforce. And that starts with listening. Listening is incredibly important as you understand what your employees need to have an inclusive environment where they can be most successful. And I talk about this when I talk about things personally. I'm like, look, I know the golden rule, and I'm certainly a religious person, and I say, you know, treat others as you would want to be treated. But I try to take a little bit of a twist on that, and I try to treat others as they would want to be treated. And I figure that out through learning and understanding the differences amongst us that helps us to drive. Now, to your question, Courtney, about what's going on today, and it is, you know, people of color and women, others are more affected than others. We have a lot of data that proves that. And so when you run your organization the way that we do, and you start with listening and understanding and doing pulse surveys to understand what people need, you make sure that you're bringing in all those perspectives and providing the things that they need. You know, one of the first things that we did when COVID hit was Al Kelly came out with a public statement, and he said, we are not laying off people. We will not lay off people because of COVID issues in this year. And we want our employees to know that that's one stress point that they do not need to have on them going forward. The other thing that we do is have, like I said, a lot of these listening and learning sessions. We're all working from home. We have a group of employees who are essential workers, and they are in the office. But the rest of us are working from home. And so we're building a culture with constant outreach and interaction so that every single employee sees their manager at least once a week. They see our CEO, Al Kelly, every single week on a video. And it's very personal. It's from his home office, and he might invite me in to speak to the whole organization or other leaders. I started off my session showing my son and me playing pickleball, because like that's our new passion. We play, I don't know if you ever heard of that. I never heard of it, but it's a good thing to play at home in your driveway, as long as I beat him. He's 16 now, so I have to beat him. That's really important. But like really showing our human side, and then sitting, and it's so funny with this environment, in a way, it's just like I start every meeting with, let me see you. Of course, I'm doing way too much video. I mean, you guys all feel this way too right now. I'm like, we got to go back to some phone because like you get, videoed out, but like, let me see you. Let me see your dog. I think that Mabel was saying, let me see your dog. Let me see your kid. Come over here and do a little dance. Let's have a conversation. Okay, let's go back to the business. Like I feel so much closer to our workforce and to their needs in some ways than when I was in the office. I was running to a meeting and trying to get something done because, as a woman leader in particular, I feel everybody I'm with, I'm sensing, how are you feeling? What is your mental state today? What's bothering you? Let's start this meeting by you telling me, how are you? And then let's go from there. So it's an interesting time to be talking about this topic because I felt like I was pretty good at it before, but I think this is driving all of us, men and women, to really put the well-being of our teammates and our colleagues front and center for the success of them and for our organizations.
And Kelly, I want to say on you a bit because I think you made a lot of really great points. From one, just speaking about the remote work culture we're in now, and you as a leader wanting to make sure everyone is seen and heard. And then you also spoke about having a workplace that's inclusive. And you said before that the legal department in an organization is a place to lead in diversity and inclusion. Why is that? And can you speak specifically about how you're accomplishing that at Visa?
Yeah, I would love to. And thank you for asking me about that, Courtney, because I'm really proud of the law department and compliance department at Visa. I'm also working in the HR function now where we do terrific things as well. But in legal in particular, for once, it's a very diverse group. There are a lot of amazing people of color and women and of all sorts in legal. And so our numbers are very, it's very diverse. And I have such a passion and commitment, since early days, I've always been involved with ERGs and focusing on these issues and diversity. And I've had so much training and so much collaboration in the space. And it's something that's near and dear to me. So as a function, we are very open, very inclusive. We drive all the good practices that bring in great people. And the beauty of the law department is it touches every aspect of the business. So we're at the table in everything, and we can bring these perspectives and touch a little bit of everything, similar to how HR operates. And so it's a real great place to drive impact. But we don't stop just with the internal. We also go to our suppliers. We hire really great law firms. Law firms are not generally great places for people of color or for women. And so what we do is we ask them to fill out audits and give us information. And we want to know who is staffing our important work with people who look like us and understand us, are going to drive our business in the right way. And as a result of that, we're actually able to drive it both internally throughout the entire organization because we touch so much and we show the way. But in addition, we're driving it externally with our partners as well.
Nice, thank you. And I want to switch to you a bit, Mabel, while we're on the conversation of diversity and inclusion, because you've written a lot about gender inequality and how you feel like it continues to persist because a lot of people don't understand the root cause of inequality. Can you speak about what some of the drivers of inequality are in the workplace and how can human-centric work cultures help to fix this?
Yes, for sure, Courtney. So much of my research really focuses on uncovering exactly what the underlying drivers of inequality are, both in terms of pay inequality, but my focus has been even more so on what leads women to be unlikely to be hired for jobs. And so I'll start maybe speaking about pay inequality, then shift into this hiring phenomenon. In terms of pay inequality, the challenge is organizations are now getting pressured more and more to know whether or not they have pay inequality. What that typically means is an organization looks at a man and a woman who have the exact same job title, and if they're paid the same, they conclude that there is no pay inequality. What we know is that very often men and women are doing virtually the same job, or doing jobs that are essentially just as demanding, require the same skills, et cetera, but just have different job titles. So the first issue is organizations need to take a step back and really understand what it means to have equitable pay. Moving beyond this notion of if I have a male accountant and a female accountant in the firm at the same level, or they pay the same, but instead think about what skills are required for these jobs. What kinds of jobs are men holding? Are they different than the kinds of jobs women are holding? Should these jobs be paid comparably even if they're not the precise same job? What we end up seeing instead is they look just within the job title, and then when they find inequities, what do? They pay women more. They say, we fixed the problem because we realized that we had some women that were paid less than men holding the same job. The reality is that doesn't actually fix the issue. What organizations need to do, and unfortunately, even well-intentioned organizations often don't have the skill set to really dig in and figure out this next step, and I think this has been the roadblock really, is they need to look and think, what are the processes we have in place that are leading to these inequities? Why do they exist in the first place? Is it because we're recruiting women and men from certain parts of certain universities, certain types of majors where women are just missing? So therefore, we disproportionately hire men because that's who is graduating from these programs. And I really like Kelly's point to this, really looking at schools and universities where lawyers are graduating who look like us. So asking themselves, is that what's leading to this inequality? Is it that we're giving managers discretion and we have lots of men in management who maybe haven't really made the mental shift to understand what it means to be equitable? So when they're setting pay in ways that are subconsciously unequal. It's not that they're trying necessarily to discriminate or to show bias against women, but these things kind of emerge because we live in a world in which women have historically held different jobs and been paid less. So really sort of digging in and trying to uncover what that is at the organizational level. I'll give one example of a key driver that I found in a recent study that we did, where we were looking in the financial industry, and we're trying to understand what leads to men and women being evaluated differently when they produce essentially the same work product. So we looked at these men and women, and they were essentially reviewing stocks. So performance on the stocks is fixed, is determined by the stock market. And we were finding that women were getting less attention, even when they were making recommendations and evaluations that were identical to their male peers. So we wanted to understand why that is, right? So it's not enough to know that it exists, but why is that the case? And what we found is that that imbalance only emerged when there were lots of candidates to select from, right? When we had hundreds of ideas put forth by these men and women, the evaluators that were looking at these suggestions were paying more attention to the men. But when there were fewer candidates, when there were only a handful of men and women, the evaluators were giving equal weight and equal credit to both men and women. So what this tells us is that when we are given a huge pool of candidates, so think about hiring now, a decision maker, a hiring manager is facing a huge pool of candidates, and they're trying to select which ones will advance to the short list. When they have this big pool, they don't have the capacity to look at each individual candidate carefully. So they fall back on these shortcuts or these heuristics. And because systemic stereotypes and biases exist, we fall on these trappings where we think, this is an analytical position. And men tend to be better with analytical skills. They tend to be better at math. So when I need to look at this list of 500 candidates and come up with a list of 10, I fall back on these heuristics and think, all else being equal, men are probably going to be more skilled at this role or more committed to this role. They're less likely to be the primary caregiver at home. Instead, when we present fewer candidates, we see that bias completely goes away. Because at that point, I can actually look at the 25 candidates one by one and really pay attention to the details and the merits of that candidate. And I no longer favor the men over the women. I don't have to rely on these shortcuts. So there's just one example, a really simple fix that doesn't require a huge money investment, a huge change in massive processes, but simply saying we're going to have our decision makers look at a smaller subset at a time and determine which candidates stand out, which candidates we want to pay more attention to. Is enough to just reduce that bias, to reduce that sorting heuristic. So I think there are tons of fixes like this. We're at the tip of the iceberg, really, in uncovering these really specific things that organizations can implement. That's one that I love because I think it's really easy to implement, whether it means you divide that work across more individuals, whether it means that you just space it out where you're not asking that person to produce that short list in a couple of days, but giving them a little bit more time to do so. just finding small fixes, small tweaks in the process that can really redress that inequality and essentially make it so that men and women of equal quality who are equally qualified for the job. Again, I want to stress it's not just about getting women in the door or lowering the bar, but it's given that they're equal performers and they have the skill set, giving them the same chance as the man to be considered for that job.
Thank you so much, Mabel. And I think you made a lot of great points just about addressing these biases that are in the workplace. And like you said, a lot of times it's not what's done on purpose, but when you're in a work structure and, you know, most work structures, men dominate the C-suite. And so naturally there's that level of unconscious bias there. I want to switch over a bit to R, because when we talk about making workplaces more equal for everyone, and as an openly gay leader of color and a writer and a producer and a curator and just an all-around creative person, can you speak a bit about how to build a work culture where employees feel like they can bring their full self to work, regardless of what's happening in the news, regardless of what's going on outside of the organization?
Yeah, so that's a thank you for asking that question. It's sort of multifaceted. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sharing your story, and then I'll talk about how do organizations play a role. You know, I want to be really mindful that we all have very different comfort levels when it comes to sharing, and I don't think one is better than the other. It's a full spectrum. But you know, at Audible, we are a storytelling company. Like, we prize ourselves in terms of how do we bring as many stories out into the world as possible to inspire, to encourage, to educate. And so, you know, I've been really mindful about, as a leader, like, what story am I telling so that others can look to me and say, okay, if she can tell this story, then I can too, or I can tell my own version and my own time. So I'm actually currently reading, I should be listening, to The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And it's really opening my eyes in some of the ways that we both hear and share stories and share information across cultures, particularly in business settings. And so I think it's really important for us to signal that we're open to hearing stories, right? Like, that's first and foremost. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. And as, you know, Mabel was talking about, there are some systemic or unconscious things that we might do that make more people feel comfortable or less comfortable, right? So how do we leverage our internal and external communications channels? Like, who's being featured on social? Who's being featured on your intranet? Who's being featured in terms of wins and accomplishments? What do you share during team meetings? Like, I loved how Kelly is like, you know, I see you, I want to know what's going on with you and all facets of you. And, you know, what are you doing at Global All Hands, like, from your leaders? What are your leaders sharing when they have that privilege and that microphone? Is it all about business? Is it about business and their lives? Is it sometimes just about their lives? Like, I think people need to have role models in terms of storytelling just as much as they need role models for operational excellence. And so for us, you know, at Audible, we're grounded by what we call our people principles. And our founder, Don Katz, you know, he came up with these all on his own, and they're very meaningful. But one is activate caring. And part of that principle, it says, to create the deepest camaraderie, trust, and a more meaningful experience of the work that defines our days, we let others really get to know who we are as individuals. And leaders understand this, and they teach it through exemplary action. So we interview candidates against these people principles. We evaluate our employees' performance with a particular emphasis on activate caring. And so it's built into who we are, but it also gives people an opportunity to learn how to share and to share effectively. And I loved what, you know, we've been talking about in terms of listening, right? Because it's just as paramount that we encourage active listening and seeking out those stories that give us a different view of ourselves, of our world, of our companies, and of our teams. And I think it's just as telling who we're willing to listen to as much as who is willing to share. So you ask kind of like, what can organizations do? So that's kind of what we can each do on a micro level and exercise, you know, the macro. But, you know, I'm a tennis player, and so I don't know how I do at pickleball. I'm sure not well. But one of the drills that you do early on is you put your racket in your less dominant hand. So I'm a lefty and always trying to play with my right hand. And that can be really painful. And so even if you're not doing tennis, just think about like how it might feel to take a pen or a pencil, how quaint, into the hand that is less dominant, unless you're ambidextrous. And think about how much mental work that takes just to do something as simple as writing your name. And so if you're a company that values productivity as much as, you know, we do, because we think that that brings value to our customers, then why would you want your employees to have to do the mental work of feeling like they have to do something different to fit in other than what is natural to them. It doesn't mean that we don't all have opportunities to grow and evolve, but it's like, let's just start by feeling like we all have something to add. And I'm really grateful to a colleague who shifted my mindset from culture fit to culture add. You know, I think that all of us have something to bring to the table as a result of who we are. And I think that, you know, we as leaders and companies need to realize that our best chance at success is cultivating a sense of abundance around opportunity and not a feeling of scarcity, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to empower and equip people on a broad spectrum to bring their highest and best.
And before I go to our next question, I want to remind those who are tuning in to please submit any questions that you may have for our panelists. We'll have a few minutes at the end of this discussion to answer any questions that you all may have. And I think you brought up a great point about creativity in the workplace. And you've often described, you know, your role at Audible as being part screenwriter, part psychologist. Can you speak a bit about how flexibility and creativity comes into play at Audible with its human-centric workplace?
Yeah, so, you know, it's one of these things where I think that you have to meet people where they are, and you also have to give them a vision of where you want them to go and how to motivate them to get there. And so, you know, because we spend so much time at work, you know, we've talked about celebrating together, but we've also been grieving together, you know, and everything in between. And so I just try to think about, you know, what can I do? And there's 2 more people principles. You can see I'm really guided by these, but they're really helpful to have frameworks. So one is imagine and invent before they ask, and another is study and draw inspiration from culture and technology. And so it's actually not that unusual for me to be in a meeting and bringing in a pop culture reference or asking people on the team, you know, what are you listening to? What are you looking at? Like, what's preoccupying you, whether it's in the real world, the virtual world, or somewhere else? Because I think it's really important for us to think of ourselves as well-rounded individuals who take in the world and experience it just as much as we want our customers to be able to experience it through the titles that we put out. And my team's job, you know, looking after everything from attraction to onboarding to performance to leadership and spectrum and belonging, which is what we call diversity and inclusion. In order for us to be able to design, deliver, and facilitate meaningful experiences that resonate, you know, we have to be able to think about individuals, and we have to be able to think about where do we meet them and use empathy and understanding to know that we have to step outside of ourselves to enrich the technical expertise that we bring.
I love that. And I want to open this question up to any one of you who want to answer. We know that a lot of organizations, because we've spoken a lot about flexibility and the importance of flexibility. And Kelly, you spoke a bit about how you lead in today's remote work culture in terms of making sure that everyone is seen. But what can organizations do to translate an office-centric culture to one that's a strong remote culture? Because I think right now a lot of companies are struggling with that, and employees are feeling it.
I can jump in first maybe, because this has been such an important issue for us. I can tell you when this all began back in March, you know, we as a leadership team met every other day. What are we doing? What are our policies? How do we deal with essential workers? How are we going to have folks think about pay, think about benefits, think about childcare, think about vacation? All of the issues at the forefront, we met constantly is how it felt, to go through them one by one, gather the inputs from our folks, and then come out and communicate just constantly. Just, you know, you are the number one thing to us. You are our team, our family, and you are what we care about. We said that constantly. Al Kelly said it every day. And so do we all. You know, again, constant meetings with folks, reaching out, touch base all the way down through the organization. Again, culture is so important to an organization. At Visa, we have a fabulous culture of people who are very close together. It's a very innovative industry. To your point, Ara, we have to keep innovation at the forefront of what we do. And everybody has the mindset that to be really great innovators, you got to be in a room together and collaborate and bring the ideas and have a free flow. How do you alter that to do it like we're doing it right now? And it's been such a focus for us. And I, you know, as a woman, as I observe a lot of things, I almost feel like it's been, in some ways, the great equalizer, right? Because nobody, for once, is in the room. You know, sometimes you're you're somewhere else and you're calling in and you're not in the room and you feel like you can't bring your whole self to that conversation. I've felt like that throughout my life. You know, now it's like everybody's in the room in the same way, in the same little box, right? So I think what we are trying to do, and I've watched and observed people who are more involved, more engaged in this environment. And, you know, we did an employee survey, and I think getting the inputs through anonymous surveys are really important things to do. We changed from doing like a big org health survey, ask you everything under the sun, to how you doing? It's a how you doing survey. It's short, it's sweet. You can do it fast because we really care. We want to know. 94% of our employees in our last survey said that they felt like senior leadership really cared about their health and well-being. 94%. That's huge, right? And then 93% also felt, because of the policies that we implemented about working, that they were just as productive in this environment as they were in the office, which I think is also a big deal. One of the things we did, though, is we modified as we went through and said, okay, how are folks feeling? They're starting to feel stressed, starting to feel they're on the video too much. There's a lot going on. I got to teach the kids, feed the kids lunch. We put in flex time. We actually said across the world, except for in some certain countries where it wouldn't be the right thing to do because their weekend starts on Thursday night versus Friday night. But Friday afternoon, no meetings, no calls, no video, no nothing. That's time for people to do whatever they want because they need to have that breather. And I'll tell you right now, we're thinking about, as we go into, people are like, oh no, my kids are not going back to school. Mine's going 2.5 days a week. So at least there's something. But as we're going into this next phase, what's I think important for the culture and the connection is that we are constantly evaluating these policies. They should not be stagnant. They should evolve. And I'm looking at some today. What else can I do to be there for our folks to make sure that they feel like we are being responsive to what their needs are? And it will continue to change for us.
Nice.
Kelly, you said something earlier that struck a chord with me about starting conversations about just how you're doing. So I'll maybe speak from the perspective of, as a more junior member of the faculty, even in my organization here at Columbia, having a senior faculty member reach out and just check in to see how I'm doing. And doing so in a way that doesn't feel like they were asked to do so. So I've experienced both, where someone will say, you know, I'm now officially your mentor, so we need to schedule a call. That has very little benefit. I sort of feel like here's another obligation, another silly Zoom call I have to jump onto. But instead, when someone just reaches out and says, you know, I know that you have a 6-week-old baby, and I just wanted to see how you're doing. It's hard enough to go through this pandemic, but how's the baby? How are things? And just there being no other agenda other than wanting to know how I'm doing goes such a long way, and I think changes my mindset and really has an impact on my mental health. So I imagine that that's a really simple thing that helps create that, not forgetting that we're not having, someone mentioned this water cooler conversation, so you don't get the opportunity to just see how people are doing. Making a diligent effort to do that informally in a way that just shares compassion and shows that you're thinking of these other people in the organization is so important.
I agree.
Yes, and speaking about just asking how you're doing, because I think even for me personally, that's just been a huge help, because I think we're all, as you all have mentioned, this pandemic is impacting us all differently, whether you're a new mom or whether you're, you have an older son or daughter, but I think it's just impacted us all in ways that we couldn't have expected. And I want to go to you a bit, because a lot of this has to deal with empathy. And I want to speak about the importance of empathy as someone who's a leader. And do you think empathy is something that can be taught? And how can workplaces build a culture that's more empathetic and that has more community, especially during a time like this, where, as we mentioned, there isn't those water cooler conversations where you can see that someone, may not be having the best day?
Yeah, so I'll talk about individual empathy, but then also organizational empathy, because I think both are really important. Early on in my career, we had a team building exercise and we were doing a session on social styles. And after finding out that I was sort of plotted in this analytical quadrant, one of our colleagues, who was very psychologically safe space, she blurted out, "So Ara, all this time I just thought you didn't like me." And I was taken aback. I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you always come in with like an agenda and you're prepared and you want to get down to work, but you're never really like, how was your weekend? How are you doing?" And it had never really crossed my mind. I mean, Kelly, I'm a recovering attorney, so it's a little different, but I was used to like 6-minute increments. You had to make every minute count and you had to bill every minute. Otherwise you would be in a work cycle that would go much longer than an 8-hour day. So I didn't really think about it. And it was her sort of stepping out and building that awareness for me that I have this blind spot, that it made me much more aware that that might not be the only one. And it also pushed me to think about, if I have a team, there's a spectrum of folks who are similar to me, and they're much more transactional, but then there are others who are much more relational. And it doesn't mean that we change one another. It just means that when we're meeting, we understand what the other person might need from us as much as what we might need from them. And so, it takes work, right? It takes getting to know each individual. And sometimes that, as you get more and more senior, keeping close to the conditions on the ground can be hard. And so that's why it's also important for me to hire people onto my team who are not like me, because they can help me. They can help me know when something's going wrong, and equally I can help them. And so I think that's one thing that we as individuals can do. But I also just wanted to sort of dial back, organizations have a responsibility right now too. And at Audible, we're really mission driven, and it's really important to us to think about at every moment, like, how are we best serving our customers and our community? And during the pandemic, I just wanted to flag a few things, because while it may not be the same for your companies, there might be other things that you're doing that are also helping your employees learn kind of what it means to have individual empathy. So one of the things, we're talking a lot about kids. I don't have kids. I have a cat and I have a niece. So I understand, but I'm not experiencing it directly. But we did offer what's called Audible Stories. And that's a place where kids and families can go for unlimited free streaming. You don't have to join Audible, but for hundreds of titles. Because right at the beginning of this, we realized that parents needed a space and a place for their kids to be able to continue learning and being excited. And while schools were kind of getting their acts together, Audible Stories provided a bridge to that, and hopefully even still continues to. Audible Sleep, free meditation, relaxation, and other offerings focusing on how to reduce stress and burnout. And then finally, Newark Working Kitchens. We're headquartered in Newark, New Jersey. And, with this pandemic, talking about the disproportionate effect, our cities are extremely vulnerable and fragile, and particularly those that are, more minority majorities, right? And so what that does is it helps provide funding and other support to our local restaurants, including many that are run by entrepreneurs of color, to deliver meals to vulnerable populations, including low-income seniors, families, the homeless, frontline medical responders, in an attempt to continue to sustain and strengthen the neighborhood anchors that keep our city and residents thriving. And so for our employees, even if they're contributing to these things virtually, it reminds us that things may be hard for us individually, but we still have a great amount of privilege and power in order to change other people's lives for the better. And I think that also helps us gain a sense of perspective and also gain a sense of like bigger purpose.
Courtney, you asked a question about whether you can teach empathy. I guess I just wanted to update that a little bit, a perspective that I'm not sure you can teach empathy from a psychological perspective, but I think ours hitting on a really important point is uncovering your blind spots, right? So I do this thing in my Power and Influence course with our MBA students where we have them fill out this survey, this battery of questions that helps them understand their strengths and weaknesses on these interpersonal communication dimensions. And very often it's things like, I didn't realize that I never asked people how they're doing. I'm very transactional in my approach. And sometimes just uncovering that, it's not that the person's not empathetic. Empathy is in there. It's just that when they're at work, they turn up or dial up a part of themselves and dial down a different part of themselves, usually because they think that's what it takes to be successful in this work environment. So just helping people uncover what those sort of tendencies are, and then helping them understand that being influential is not just being hard driving and pushing your idea forward, but also being likable and being someone that people feel they can connect to. We talk about these two dimensions being both necessary for actually exercising influence. So I think organizations can help with this, but even just as individuals, finding ways to get feedback, whether it's filling out some sort of survey that gives you some data on yourself, or reading between the lines when you're getting feedback from a manager or from a peer, when someone's trying to alert you to, you're really transactional in your approach and you might want to consider how that could help. Pushing and asking questions and making yourself receptive to that feedback so that you yourself can update and think about how can I engage more effectively in these interactions.
And I think that's super important, Mabel, especially when you spoke about the part about being receptive to feedback. I think especially as leaders, like you have to understand, especially during times like today, how your team is feeling and what feedback do they have and what you can be doing better to ensure that people are feeling welcome in that work environment. We're getting close to the end of our session, and I want to make sure that I leave enough questions, enough time for questions. And I know that Ara has to leave us a bit before Q&A, but before we switch over to Q&A, I want to ask, do you all have anything else that you want to add, especially as we're all trying to get adjusted to this new normal with remote work? It's now the normal, it's not the exception. And as companies and leaders are trying to adjust to that and manage teams, do you all have any advice or any parting words that you want to leave on making sure that companies keep humans and people who work at their company at the forefront moving forward?
I guess maybe I'll just start since I have to leave. But first, I want to thank all the people in the chat. I feel like it's really added a dimension to this conversation that, the virtual space has opened up. I just wanted to leave you with a quote that my stepmom gave me early on, and it's really helped me during times like this. It was about, forget balance, try happiness. And so, there's so many things that fall through the cracks every day, whether it's at work or at home or just personally. And it's given me a sense of patience with myself and with others and with circumstances I can't change. And so I think as we're trying to navigate and help our teams navigate, I think it's not about sort of this delicate, high wire act. It's really about digging in and figuring out what makes you feel like your best self. And then how do you get there, and how do you ask others to help you get there along the way?
I'm posting that quote on a wall.
That's a good one. I like that one. How many times you've been on a panel, people say, hey, Kelly, do you have balance in your life? I'm like, hell no, I do not have balance. Let me just be honest with you. It doesn't exist. I love that too. I would just leave people with the thought of, I feel like my role is to make sure that I'm setting the tone, and that is being an authentic leader. I tried to be, Ara knows this, that young lawyer who was like, like that suit, the bun, the whole, yeah, that was me. Obnoxious too, but that was then. This is now. But it is. Work is such a great place when you feel you are yourself. We all know this, and it's my job to be myself, set that example, so that folks can feel the same way. And I bring that in. And as senior leaders of an organization with your teams, your job is to make sure you set that tone, because that's how you get the most out of people. When they feel you're vulnerable, you're human, you make mistakes, you got some stuff going on in your life too, just like they do. It connects us at a level that's very different. I didn't understand that when I was very junior. I do now, and I think it's one of the most important things that you can do at any level in an organization is make sure that you are bringing your whole self and being very authentic in who you are, and opening up the space for others to be the same.
So I'll very quickly add an organizational level element that I think is really important. To Kelly's point about bringing yourself to work, I think organizations and organizational decision makers, hiring managers, need to think about that in the hiring process. Right? The way you create a human-centric organization is making sure you're bringing in humans who are going to add to the values and core beliefs of the organization. Very often, I think in hiring, we're going for the best, and the best is something quantitative on paper having to do with where they went to school and what their major was. We need to take that as one layer, but make sure that in the interview process, we're using the interview to get at who is this person and what will they bring to work every day. Are they going to be their authentic self? And is their authentic self the kind of self that we need to add value to this organization? The selection process is so important. And I think very often organizations find themselves at a standstill where they think we have the values, we're stating these beliefs, we're making these claims, yet we can't seem to implement it. And that's because it's the individual managers and individual employees that actually bring these things to fruition. So if you're not bringing in the right people for that culture or to create that culture, you'll never get there. So just being honest and sort of transparent about what that is, and making sure you're trying to match on that element in addition to the quality and the quantitative components that we look at often.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Mabel. And like I said, Ara, I know that you have to go. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And right now we're going to go over to Q&A because we have lots of questions. So yes, let me look at what we have. So this first one is either for Mabel or Kelly, if either of you want to answer. It says, how do you respond to employees who are jealous or angry that another employee or group of employees have received some sort of flexibility to address their specific situation? Oh, Kelly, I think you're on mute.
Maybe while Kelly figures that out, I'll jump in quickly here. I think this is a challenge and a struggle that is real within organizations. Jealousy does exist, frustrations in other employees do exist, but I often think that we actually manifest this for ourselves and worry about it as the individual who's taking advantage of a policy. We sort of imagine that everyone else is frustrated or upset that we're not pulling our own weight. So I think it's important to just keep that in check as a first step and be sure that we're not avoiding taking advantage of policies because we're concerned that other people are going to lash out. Having an open dialogue where these things are brought to the table and it's made clear that these policies exist for everyone and that it's not just about having children, but if you need to care for an elderly parent, for example, these policies exist for you as well, makes it feel like even if you're the individual who doesn't have a child, you still can take advantage of the flexibility. Maybe it's because your partner's traveling and you need to work remotely because you're traveling with them. Just really being transparent about the different ways that the policy can be taken advantage of can make it feel more accessible to everyone. But as the individual taking use or making use of the policy, also being careful not to make assumptions. It probably isn't always the case that everyone else is mad that you're taking advantage of flexibility.
Thanks, and I'm sorry about that. My dog was barking, so I had to mute. There's a big black lab, and it's like,
no worries.
Sorry. Yeah, and trust me, it's one of those things that we really thought about because we have this leverage, this opportunity where we can give people paid time off, working with the manager and what their circumstances are. So it could be my parents have COVID, or I can't get this, I can't work right now. This child thing is just too much for me, or I'm sick, or whatever it is. So created this flexible approach with managers to deal with issues as they arise in this environment, just like we always do, but a little bit more clear cut, as Mabel was saying, like this environment, this exists for folks. And you're hoping though that your culture is one where, you set the tone and we are all in this together and we support each other. So my neighbor gets some benefit, I don't, but I'm going to call her and say, can I also help you? I know you need to take leave, but can I do some of this work for you? Can I help you with my babysitter or whatever it might be? You're hoping that that's the kind of environment you have worked hard to create. That being said, that kind of thing's going to happen, and you can't solve for everything, but you are really transparent. Like Mabel said, I think that's incredibly important. Have a big conversation today about transparency. You can't do things in a secret room. You got to put it out there. You got to be consistent in your approach. But then in this case, we said the consistent approach is we're going to deal with one-by-one situations. We're going to have some things that apply to everybody, but otherwise we're going to have the opportunity to flex for people who really need it because their manager's involved with them and closely connected. So it was a really good question. Thank you for asking.
Yes. And we have lots of other really great questions, including this one. It says, in some ways, work-life balance for parents seems like a clear situation to discuss and make policies for. For women who do not have children, it still feels hard to justify time requests. What if balance is in quotes, includes other interests rather than other people's needs? Can human-centric policies give space for exploration of hobbies or even side businesses?
Can I jump in on this one really quick?
Yes,
I am trying to remove the word balance from, because I think it's like chasing a unicorn. I honestly think it is. Balance indicates, right, that there's a perfect point, that we're all chasing something that maybe doesn't exist, that there's a single perfect point, and when you get to it, you can set it and forget it and walk away from it. And the reality is our professional lives and our personal lives that are on either side of that spectrum are changing daily. So what worked for you in the past might not work for you in the future, and what you need today is different than what you need tomorrow. So what I've encouraged, and I think it comes back to what we were talking about with that last piece as well, is the transparency, the open dialogue, having the conversation, and empowering ourselves not to find that one single solution that we can set, forget, and walk away, but stepping back a little bit to, like Ara said, it's similar mantra, what works for me right now? What do I need right now? Right now, I might need to, like my manager, leave early 3 days a week. But now that she has children who are in college, she has different needs, right? As I was dealing with a father who was critically ill, I had different needs at that time than I have today. So just giving ourselves some grace, that we're not chasing a single answer that somebody else has figured out and we haven't. I know, Kelly, you think people reach out to you and say you have it. People do that, the same thing to me. There isn't something that some people have figured out in others, but there's an acceptance that some people have decided, this is what will work for me right now, knowing that it's temporary. My circumstances will change both on the personal side and the professional side of that spectrum.
Yes, I love that. What works for me right now. I think that's so key. Thank you, Kristen. Another question we have says, employee loneliness has become a major concern for companies during this pandemic with remote workforces. What are your organizations doing to combat employee loneliness, and how can we replace water cooler chats and conversations at the coffee machine?
I'll just jump in on this one really quickly, because I think one of the things that's come out of this are these, which I think are wonderful. I love virtual happy hours. And it's so funny because I'm also the leader of our New York office. So we started doing them regularly, right, when this all started, and people are doing them everywhere, like all across the world. We're having a virtual, like, hey, it's 10 o'clock in the morning for me. That's okay. You can have a beer or whatever. But, it's like, come together. And so this is not just driven by management. Like we said it, we do but the engagement across, and then we have web portals where people go and they're sharing pictures of their virtual lives with the dogs and the kids and or, me hiking today. I don't have kids and I don't have a dog. We love those people too. And we want to see what they're up to and make sure that we're giving them what they need. But creating an environment where people are not just connecting about work. We're doing a lot of connecting that is not about work. Because I heard that loneliness early on, particularly some folks who, I'm fortunate. I have a wonderful husband and I'm here with my son, which is good and bad. But those who don't, they're alone in an apartment in New York City and they don't want to go outside. You're like, oh my gosh. What can I do for you? Let's get you a cat or a dog. Maybe that'll help. But if not, let's get together and talk. We have a guy, he's our DJ. And so we come together and he plays uplifting music for us when we come together. And it's just, bringing the fun and the connection, not just being all about work, I think is incredibly important now more than ever. And I love to see it coming up grassroots and I'm getting pictures. People send me pictures of their happy hours. And everybody's, which is just, they're just coming together and they're there for each other. And that is such a wonderful culture.
I just want to add with the city, I think that you're right. I live in New York City. I think it's right that there are added challenges, especially when we were at the height of the pandemic and things were especially tense here. There's also, as things have calmed down, opportunities for small group, socially distant gatherings. The nice thing about being in the city is you can walk down to the park, don't have to get on public transit or anything, and just do a socially distant visit with a coworker. I don't know if that's something that necessarily makes sense for organizations to organize, but just putting that on the table as an option. Can you have a quick discussion or a quick meeting from 8 feet apart on a park bench wearing masks? Is that an option? I know for me, just running into a coworker when I go out to walk my dog and getting to see someone from a distance for 10 minutes is life-giving if it makes you feel like you're part of this community and you're not just in your apartment alone all day. So just thinking about that and creative ways that you can have these one-off conversations, which are easiest done in the city, where you're close by.
I think if I could add one other piece of it too, and I agree completely with what's been said, but one of the other things is the part about water cooler that was so great, it was unscheduled. And now that we're in this world of video conference, everything still seems to be so scheduled. And it's okay to pick up the phone and call somebody without having a scheduled Zoom call or without having a scheduled meeting. So trying to still make some of those personal connections just throughout the day, just picking up the phone. I reached out and called a colleague the other day and I said, hey, I'm not calling for any other reason other than to say I miss talking to you in the hallways in between meetings, and I hope you and your family are safe and well. But just creating kind of those unscheduled connections again is something that has been helpful in addition to the things that you have mentioned.
Yes, and I think that's so key, Kristen. I know even during this whole time, I've had colleagues where if I think about them, because I'm so used to seeing them in the office, every day, and I might just message them and say, hey, how's your day? And then it's been several times we would just hop on the phone for a quick 15 minutes just to do a check-in. And so I do agree with you. I think with everything being so scheduled, I think now sometimes people just want a casual, like, hey, let's check in. Hey, do you have a few minutes to chat? And it really helps. This next question, it seems to be for you, Kelly. It says, as a lawyer, I observe that one of the main obstacles to adopting a human-centered workplace is that there's a pipeline of mostly white, mostly male attorneys who are able and willing to follow the old model of success, bill a lot of hours, and leave your personal life at the door. The existing leadership then is able to dismiss the move for better policies because they aren't needed. How do you make the case when faced with this attitude?
It's a great question. And it goes back to, when I started practicing law 30 years ago, it was a very different culture. And I fit into it. That's what I thought you had to do to be successful. So, and as I've grown and seen, and I can't say enough about the wonderful men in the legal and compliance function at Visa, where, we started a call yesterday and it was the first thing, one of our team members is pregnant. And, the male leader's like, woohoo, we got a baby coming, it's like, these are my people, it was like, not, back in the day, men would be like, oh my gosh, my team member's pregnant, right? But this is important, and I want everybody to know it. And we were all just together, and that we're calling it our baby. I'm calling it my baby because it's just so awesome. But we're fortunate because we have this culture at Visa, but generally speaking across the board in legal, it's not that way, and law firms in particular. And so, what I'd say to you, if you're at a law firm in particular, and I'm one of your clients, tell me to help drive your culture. Tell me not to spend my money at your firm unless your firm drives the same type of policies that I do in the company, because that's what you want to see. And I listened to that. I've gone and met with law firms and I've gotten the feedback, and I've been reached out to by women who are saying, look, Kelly, can you help? Can you help drive this culture into the firms too? And I'm like, you got it. I'm doing it. I'm definitely going to do it. And you're making me think, because now I'm sort of like, tell me who's on your team. Tell me who's a partner. Tell me how you're populated in terms of representation. I may go a little bit further now because of what you said. I may say, tell me about your culture. And I want to hear it from some of the women. I want to hear it from some of the people of color. I want to hear it from LGBTQ. I want to know how they feel about your policies and how you enable their success. And you come through for me on that, and I'll continue to work with you and give you the money I give you. If not, I'll go elsewhere. So thank you for the comment.
And I believe we have time to answer one more question. And this one kind of ties back a bit to an earlier question that was asked. But it says, when additional benefits such as more time off are provided to parents, how is the workload not just shifted to those who don't have children?
I can jump in. That's where management comes in. And Kristen, you probably have perspectives. Why don't you go ahead on this one? It's a hard one. I'll let you do it.
That is a really difficult one. And I think that's the challenges of managers. But I think it comes back to, Kelly, I'm going to come back to what you said. So I'm just going to echo you a little bit. But it's about having those open and transparent conversations, about bringing the team together and talking about it. Okay, the work doesn't change. We've still got to get this done. But here's the situation that we have. And you'll have people who raise their hand and are willing to go that extra mile, or they can cover, or you can look at options to bring in temporary help to help along with some of those things. But I think, again, that transparency, the open conversations, so that people don't feel like somebody's getting something that they're not, or they're being penalized because they're not in a specific class. But talking about, I think one of the things that I shared with my management team one time is, not everybody needs to be treated equally, but everybody needs to be treated fairly, right? And in addressing what their individual needs are at that particular time. So certainly maybe they're getting a little bit more paid time off when they have the e-learning responsibilities at home during this time. But again, I'm going to go back to what I said. It's temporary. I mean, this is a long temporary right now, but it's temporary. And you never know when you might need some sort of the ability to the flexibility to address what you have going on in your life. And I'd like to say that you'll get that same consideration at that time as well.
And on that note, we're out of time, but thank you so much, Mabel and Kelly and Kristen, for joining us and speaking about this important topic. And thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. I hope you enjoyed our conversation.
The chat's been fabulous. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Mabel, Kristen. It was fun.
Thank you.
That was such a great conversation. I saw the comments in the chat, and I loved the interaction with the speakers and in the chat. That was such a great conversation, and I'm so glad you're all able to join us. Remember that Mobilize Women Week is throughout the rest of the week, so there's so much more coming up the rest of today. We're doing a mentoring meetup at 3 p.m. Eastern. And then after that, we're doing a larger panel event tonight with our very own Sally Krawcheck, alongside of Neil Blumenthal, Sandra Campos, and Kristen Shaughnessy. So that's going to be at 7 p.m. tonight Eastern, and you're not going to want to miss that one. And so as I mentioned before, don't forget to visit the experience page at mobilizewomen2020.com. There's other ways to interact and engage on there, and don't forget to come back and see us again. Thank you so much and have a good rest of the day.